Yoga can help with fear, stress, and anxiety in so many different ways, as more and more research is showing. I would tell myself not to be too distracted in regards to, even when I was doing meditation practice in these ashrams or monasteries, I feel like a lot of it was driven by what's going to come later, like the food, that we were going to eat at those ashrams, which used to be so delicious, or my thoughts would be wandering, right? So I didn't sometimes fully engage in those practices, being a wife, being a mother, being a teacher, being pretty much everything, a human being, right? So it has allowed me to look at all of these aspects in so many ways and try to be better. There are obviously, it's a work, but that's, I think, what this year has sort of tested. But then whenever I come back to my yoga practice, whenever I sit down for meditation in the morning, even if it's 5 minutes in the evening before I go to bed, those are the times I actually look forward to during these hectic sort of moments.
Vanakkam, namaste, and hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Minds of Great Yogis. In today's episode, we have a very special guest joining us. And to start off, she's an assistant professor in the departments of Psychiatry and Neuroscience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. She obtained her Ph.D. in neuroscience from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she studied the role of the amygdala subregions in regulation of stress and sensorimotor gating. She did her postdoctoral work at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she studied fear and stress regulation via the amygdala. At the Icahn School of Medicine, her team focuses on the brain, vagus nerve, and body interactions and mechanisms of fear, stress, anxiety, and energy metabolism to understand how the body communicates with the brain and regulating these functions. She has also been a lifetime practitioner since her childhood in Nepal. She teaches yoga classes in her spare time, and she is also passionate about the historical and spiritual aspects of yoga and incorporates those in her teachings. For her path of yoga is both scientific and spiritual. Let's give a big round of applause to Abha Rajbhandari. Hi, Abha. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Nice kind of cold, chilly morning in New York. Yeah, thank you for doing this. This is amazing, sharing this perspective of yoga. It's really needed, I think, in today's time.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so kind of you. And I'm so excited to hear your perspectives of yoga. I read your introduction and I'm impressed, and I cannot wait for all of our viewers and listeners to hear your perspective of yoga. So thank you again. And to start off, I would like to start off by asking you, how did your journey of yoga begin?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, yeah, I've been a lifelong yoga practitioner, but in various different forms, right? It's definitely a journey. I was born in Nepal. I grew up in Nepal around both Buddhist as well as Hindu sort of aspects of religion as well as spirituality. And from childhood, my mom used to take me and my sister, I have a younger sister, to temples, ashrams, monasteries for meditation. So a lot of my practice was very much centered around meditation. My dad actually practiced the asana-based yoga. So he did a lot of asanas and pranayamas. That was his thing in the morning. But I never took it as something that was my thing, but I was more focused on the meditation. And so I think my path of yoga was more like a bhakti yoga kind of path, going along with my mom, and incorporating these dhyana and pranayama sort of aspects. So yeah, that's how it began.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's wonderful that you chose the path of yoga, and it has a way of transforming us into a very new version. So definitely, thank you so much for sharing that. Now I want to come into the next question by asking you, did you find science and yoga to be interconnected? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's a question I think at this point in my life, I can say that my path of, when I look at the science aspect of my life and yoga, they're so similar in so many ways. And the reason is I feel like both yoga path as well as scientific path is about at the core understanding who we really are, right? So in a
Yeah.
biological mechanism, when we're trying to understand how cells work, how a heart works, how our brain works, we're trying to understand who we are as human beings. And so
Yeah.
it is a empirical sort of, this experimental path. But at the same time, yoga is also a scientific path in that sense where we're asking very similar questions, who we really are at the core, like
Mhm.
what am I made of, this kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so I feel like in that sense, both are a path of discovery. They
Mhm.
allow us to understand who we are.
Mhm.
And from the truest form, the Vedic science, where yoga comes from, is actually a huge, a part of it is scientific knowledge. And so I feel like at this point in my journey, I feel like the science and yoga are so similar. I find very, similarities, but yoga is more experiential, right? There's no
Yeah.
empirical aspect, but in some ways there are. But yeah, both are scientific.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's very nice to see how they're like both scientific and how, in some shape or form, they're kind of connected. So that's a very unique perspective. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I want to come into the next question by asking you, so what are some yoga postures you would like to recommend for improving the memory?
Hmm. That's a very good question. I don't think there is a specific posture per se that's tied to memory performance, because what research shows and ongoing research, there's a lot of research on yoga's effect on the brain now. But I think what so far the research shows is that it has to be a combination of physical aspect, so a lot of aerobic exercises in combination with breath control and meditation. So that has shown to have effects on better memory performance, better attention, stress management, and that kind of thing. And so, stress management can also lead to better memory. So, when we're not focused on stressors, we can have better memory performance. And so, I think the key in all of these scientific research that is coming out is that the meditation or the dhyana is a vital component. So just doing physical exercise of any form is not going to lead to better memory performance by itself. Or even if it does, combining the meditation makes it even better. So there are exercise related studies showing better memory performance, better hippocampal memory. But when you add the meditation, I think it's even better from what the data is showing. And so I think also based on like long-term meditation practitioners who've never done asanas, even
Mhm.
their brains are very sharp in regards to memory and
Yeah,
attention, right?
for
So
sure.
I think the key component is definitely the meditation, which cannot be skipped. So I think
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And meditation is so, so important. I feel like when you start to meditate, there's always that type of stress we have at the starting. And then after you meditate, you're just stress free and you just let go of all of that things through meditation. So it's very interesting that you mentioned how it can also help with improving the memory power as well. So I hope that our audience or listeners take this into consideration. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And now I want to come into the next question by asking you, so do you have a guru or a mentor that inspired you?
Um, yeah, that's a very good question. So like I said, my journey of yoga has been very varied, right? So when I
Mhm.
grew up, I went to not just temples and ashrams, I also went to monasteries. So I don't think I have been inspired by like just one guru or one person. I've had quite a few of them. But I think it's more this combined sort of knowledge and experience that I've gained from many different gurus Sadhgurus and others, but what I would definitely say is that during my early part of my or end part of my postdoctoral work, I took the inner engineering course and I took the Sambhavi Mahamudra Kriya with Sadhguru. So he was
Oh, okay.
visiting in the US, in Pennsylvania, and I went to that for 3 days and did that. And so that was a very profound experience for me. And so it allowed me to dig even more deeper spiritually as well as scientifically
Mhm.
into what my true self is, and understanding what this bliss inside of us, which kind of is what Sadhguru's path is. And so
Mhm.
yeah, I think that really allowed me to go deeper. So I won't say, overall, I've been inspired by many different other gurus, I would say also. There's a
Yeah.
lot of knowledge from
Yeah.
so many people. So yeah, that's what I would share in my
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think there are various gurus and mentors that we come across in our paths, and they just inspire us in so many unique ways, and they're all unique in their own ways. So I think a guru or a teacher is so important in our lives, and they're the ones that like guide us to do better in anything, absolutely. So in this case, yoga. So thank you for sharing that. And now I want to come to the next question by asking you, how can yoga help ease fear, stress, anxiety?
Mm. Yeah, this question is very relevant with what we're all going through as a whole,
The
beings on
pandemic.
this earth, right? Like
Yeah.
all of us are experiencing this pandemic right now, which is, I guess, the biggest stressor, or one of the biggest stressors in our life right now. And so I think to answer that question, we have to look at fear, stress, and anxiety a little bit more deeply, because there are different components of them. And
Mhm.
so what is a stress reaction? A stress reaction is basically a reaction that's triggered by exposure to either psychological, physical, or environmental stressors, right? So they can be many different kinds of stressors. And so the responses that we have against those stressors are these defensive reactions that kind of lie in the continuum of fight or flight or freeze reactions, right? So when we're
Yeah.
facing these stressful situations, that's what our body tends to do, is either fight or flight or freeze. And so
Mhm.
these are associated with activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which causes increased heart rate, increased breathing. And so it's not just the memory of the specific stressor or trauma, for example, in anxiety condition like post-traumatic stress disorder, that's triggering, but it's also these bodily changes that are happening because of the reminder of that trauma or experience. And there are also things like immune dysregulation, gut functions, metabolism. All of those are also changing, either due to acute stressors or chronic stressors, right? So those are also different parts of it. And so just a simple thought of a traumatic experience can cause our brain and body to kind of go haywire and have this like experience, even though we're not in that situation of a stressor, to have that fight or flight kind of mode. And so in that sense, yoga is this in all encompassing practice, right? It's a physical practice, it's a spiritual practice, it's a mental practice, it has the breath control aspect. And so combining all of these aspects, we are in a way touching on almost every aspect that goes awry in conditions of stress, fear, and anxiety. And so,
Yeah.
for example, breath control practice like pranayama has been very well established and associated now scientifically to control emotions, right? It has this connection with emotional regulation. Brainstem region that receive information about the breath send that information to brain regions like the hippocampus, the amygdala, which are important for this memory of trauma or specifically emotional regulation. And so, therefore, by combining breath control, we're modulating higher order brain functions. Another aspect is meditation, which I already talked about. By
Yeah.
engaging in meditation, we are engaging in kind of suppressing or putting a pause button on our thoughts or these kind of memories memories of those thoughts that come, right? And so that's another part of it, or very key part of it. So overall, I think by breath control, by meditation, by this asana-based practice, it allows this balance of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So, certain breath control practices increase parasympathetic
Yeah.
activation, and then same with other types of meditation practices. And so, therefore, I think yoga is about strengthening these connections in our brain, for better habit, but for better mind control in that sense of these negative thoughts, but also kind of tuning our body to not react in the same way that it used to react, right? So that's why it's a practice of training ourselves in that scientific sense. So yeah, yoga can help with fear, stress, and anxiety in so many different ways, as more and more research is showing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was super informative. And for sure, I think yoga can help in so many different levels. There's different types of styles and there's different types of magnitudes that yoga can help with stress, fear, anxiety. So I hope the audience can really find this helpful in terms of what you mentioned. So
Mhm.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. And now I
Yeah,
want to come,
can I add one
yeah,
thing?
go
I
ahead.
just want
Yeah.
to summarize, I said a
Yeah.
lot of things in that. I
Yeah.
just want to give like a little
Blurb.
snippets kind of
Yeah.
summary. So, in summary, how yoga can help in that sense is that sympathetic and parasympathetic balance, one. Second, it can help with increased neuroplasticity for better thinking in our brain.
Yeah.
Third, it can help with balance in our body. And then the fourth is better or enhanced attention, emotional regulation, and memory. So those are the aspects, I think, four aspects of yoga. To
Yeah.
summarize, yeah, just,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to like just throw out so many things there.
Yeah. Thank you for breaking them down and putting into four prominent points. I hope the audience take those into consideration and take note of these as they're so important. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, Abaha. And I want to come into the next question by asking you, how do you incorporate historical and spiritual aspects of yoga into your classes?
Mm, yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think that's been a kind of a journey for me also understanding both the historical and the spiritual aspects. And I always try to share in my class elements of spirituality in the sense of understanding, going back to that question of who we are, right? What
Mhm.
is our purpose in this vast cosmos? For example, being in this
Yeah.
earth, like what is our purpose? And I think understanding our place in this cosmic vastness or our cosmic nature or just in general our nature, and the presence in this place is has to sort of incorporate both spirituality and history, right? Because
Yeah.
historically also, both from scientific end as well as spiritual end, there is so much to learn about who we are, how we have evolved as human beings, and same with in regards to spirituality, or aspects of spirituality. And so yoga itself, for if we look at it, if we look
Mhm.
at just one asana, for example, how that came about, like what is the reason that asana was developed by these previous rishis or yogis, can lead to so many queries, right? It
Mhm.
has both this historical aspect, but also a spiritual aspect of why that posture was created. And same thing for so many other aspects of yoga. I think it's really a
Mhm.
path of understanding, not just like doing what is told, but
Yeah.
understanding why we're doing what we're doing, right? So for me, that's always a thing. Like it's always part of my learning is like on trying to understand why this came about and what is the
Yeah.
purpose and what's the connection spiritually. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And really liked how you mentioned about self-realization into
Mm-hmm.
your practices of yoga, which is also very important. And in terms of incorporating historical and spiritual aspects of yoga, I think that's also very important because um, and can really connect a lot with the practices and can really resonate with the students as well. So it's equally as important. So yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
And
very good questions. I love these.
thank you. And very good answers as well. I love it. And now I want to come into the next question by asking you, what is something you would tell your young self that started to practice yoga? So
Mm,
when you were young in your childhood days, in Nepal, when you practiced yoga, what would you tell
mm.
your young self in this moment?
Um, the young self at that stage, I think I would tell myself not to be too distracted in regards to, even when I was doing meditation practice in these ashrams or monasteries, I feel like a lot of it was driven by what's gonna come later, like the
Mhm.
food, that we were gonna eat at those ashrams, which used to be so delicious, or my thoughts would be wandering, right? So I
Yeah.
didn't sometimes fully engage in those practices. So at that stage, I would say, like, dig deeper. It's hard sometimes as a child. I think what I would say to what I've learned from so far is the part of my yoga practice which I'm the most not happy about the way I took it is actually during my grad school years
Oh,
where I incorporated this fully asana based practice for my own stress reliever because grad school was very difficult. But I think I was drawn towards just the physical aspect of yoga at that time so much that I think I got kind of like drawn towards doing headstands and handstands and all these tough postures so much more that I wasn't actually doing this mental sort of work that I needed, like the meditation or the breath control pranayama. I wasn't doing those. I was ignoring those and just focusing on how I could do a handstand, right? And so
yeah.
I think that's the part when I look back, I was like, what was I thinking, right? Like I
Mhm.
wasn't actually doing yoga. I was drawn towards this illusion of yoga outside,
Yeah.
sort of, but not digging deeper. So that's the part of my life I would tell myself to not be drawn towards this outside persona or this outside part, but dig more deeper, understand who I really am, and be confident in myself. I think that's what I would tell. So,
Yeah.
other than that, I'm very happy. Like in this point, I'm, digging deeper into so many different ways that I should have been, but yeah, at that point I didn't. But it's a learning experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so important because at the young age, at a young age when we start to practice yoga, our focuses kind of shift at different stages. So yeah, I really like how you mentioned that. And self-realization is what I get from this. It's also so important about analyzing our true self. It's about what's on the inside rather than the outside world.
Mhm.
And we're all like, in terms of the pandemic as well, we're all kind of, the COVID has taken a huge toll on all of us. So yoga is one of the best solutions in terms of kind of the mental practices or meditation that can really help ease all that stressors out. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
It's
just
so
one
important.
thing I do want to mention is that yoga is complementary. So, for some
Yeah,
people who are going through fear, stress, and anxiety related disorders, they're
yeah,
going through therapy or treatment, and that's very important. And yoga acts as a complementary practice. It doesn't
yeah,
replace those, but it can
yeah,
help
for
better. So,
sure.
that's something scientifically it's important to understand. It's not a replacement for some of these therapies, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it acts as a really good replacement, and I think the movement of the body can also really help have a good impact in our mental health. So
Right, the
yeah,
complementary aspect.
yes, for sure. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important. So now I have some rapid fire questions for you, which is one of my favorite
Mhm.
segments. So I want to start off by asking you, what lessons have yoga taught you?
Yeah, I think it ties to that same part of being who I am. So I think the biggest ones are being patient, which, I'm a very highly energetic person. So usually I think that's what it has taught me. And also the confidence in my true self and my abilities. I think that's what it has allowed me to really dig into. So yeah.
Yeah, well
What do
said.
you
I
think?
think that's great. And I like how you said confidence, which is so important. So yeah,
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. And now I want to come into the next question by asking you, what is one word you would use to describe yoga and why?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, yoga itself is so like encompassing, but
Yeah.
I would say, actually, can I say two words I think that I think of usually from
Yeah.
one from scientific, one from spiritual. One from scientific for me, yoga is brain, breath, body. And then
Okay.
from a spiritual perspective, it's cosmic Om. That's what I always think of it as, cosmic Om, because Om is encompassing.
Yeah, I love the two, how you divided both of them and how you
Yeah,
mentioned the two
everything in my life, I feel like I look at it spiritually and scientifically, so
scientific.
it's always like that.
Yeah, I like how you divided them, and you mentioned cosmic Om as well. So Om alone, it has a huge significance. I think
Yeah,
saying it alone, it brings a positive aura. So
yeah.
definitely, thank you for sharing that. And now I want to come into the final question. This is more of a reflection question in terms of how 2021 has been for you.
Mm.
So, which brings me to the question, how has this year been for you in terms of yoga?
Mm. Yeah, so this year, I would say for like many of us, it has been challenging. It has tested so many aspects in profound ways of being human, right?
Yeah.
I think the main things are it has tested our patience, it has tested how we deal with so many challenges in life when they come at once. Like, what do we
Yeah,
do, right? So I
for
think
sure.
that has happened to me. I started my research lab not too long ago. And so dealing with that, making sure my lab is running, but at the same time, being a wife, being a mother, being a teacher, being a pretty much everything, a human being, right? So it has allowed me to look at all of these aspects in so many ways and
Mhm.
try to be better. There are obviously, it's a work,
Yeah.
but that's, I think, what this year has sort of tested. But then whenever I come back to my yoga practice, whenever I sit down for meditation in the morning, even if it's 5 minutes in the evening before I go to bed,
Mhm.
those are the times I actually look forward to during these hectic sort of moments, and
Yeah.
just sitting down, even if it's not like really emptying my mind, the thoughts may not always cease, but just observing what kind of thoughts they are. Is it positive, is it negative?
Yeah.
I think that itself has been such a learning kind of process. I think this pandemic has definitely taught me way more to dig deeper than being in this sort of outside things that are not in our control, but
Yeah.
to see how I can react to them better. But it's not perfect, but I
Yeah.
feel like I see the improvement in subtle, small ways. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing that. And I think I really liked how you mentioned about how, when you take the time to practice yoga and meditations more, I kind of see it as like a self-care kind of thing for you. So I think it's so important to take the time out of your day and, do meditation or yoga and to kind of treat yourself. So for sure. And of course, you mentioned about kind of analyzing those thoughts, whether that be negative or positive, and of course, inhaling positive energy and letting out all the negative energy and cleansing that body. So yeah, thank you so much for
Yeah,
sharing
thank
that.
you. These are amazing questions, and I'm so happy to be able to share some snippets of these from my own experience, right? Sometimes it
Yeah.
helps. Mm-hmm.
For sure. Thank you so much for joining me. I think I loved hearing the scientific perspective of yoga, and I hope I look forward to sharing this episode with all of our audience and listeners as well. So I cannot wait for all of them to hear this episode. And so that is the end of our rapid fire questions round. Thank you so much for joining me, Abha. I really appreciate you giving me your valuable time, and I hope we can speak again. And just before we end, I believe you are on Instagram. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, I am. I started my Instagram page to share about neuroscience, my connection with nature, yoga, and the metabolic aspect, which also study. And so that's why it's Nourish. So it's Neuro, Namaste, Nature, Nourish. So those are the aspects that I also cover in my Instagram or share, I would say.
Okay,
And I'm
yes.
also on Twitter, and my Twitter name is Cosmic Om Brain.
Oh wow. I love those names. You really get really creative with your username. So yeah, it's wonderful. So
Yeah, I've changed the Instagram ones a few times, but I feel like this is where I'm at in general with my
yeah.
life. So yeah, it's about sharing that aspect.
Yeah, the prominence of the words in our life can make a huge difference. So I think having it as a username is really smart as well. So definitely
Mhm.
do check out Abha's Instagram page as well as her Twitter, as she mentioned. I'm sure you'll love all the content she shares, and I know the page is amazing because I've checked it out myself. So definitely do check
Thank you
that
so
out.
much, Swati.
Yeah, of course. And thank you to everyone who has yet to listen to our 19th episode of Inside the Minds of Great Yogis. And until next time, have a great day, everyone. And I will see you all in the next episode.